Thanks. Thanks for joining this informational meeting today. We'll have quite a few members of the Wisconsin Agricultural Export Advisory Council, as well as other guests, speakers, and guests from at large. Just word of note, this meeting will be recorded and we can make it available to you after the meeting concludes. No official business will be conducted by the Agricultural Export Advisory Council today. This is informational only, and we hope to continue these meetings on a regular basis on different topics. So I'd like to turn it over to Randy to give a welcome, and then we'll start the presentations.
Thank you, Lisa. Everybody, thanks for joining us. So we're not going to do an official roll call or anything like that. That'll be reserved for the formal meetings, and Lisa will kind of help be doing run of show for today. But I just wanted to be clear about which members we have on board right now. And I see Charles, Larry, Keith, and this is a snapshot into my mindset, but I think I recognize Chad's phone number. Chad, is that you?
Yes, Chad did call in.
Okay, all right. And then Kevin said he was going to be on. Kevin Krenz, are you on as well? I see a 920 number. I didn't know if that was who is the 920 phone number? Just so I'm clear, just so I know who's on board. If you want to just send a note to Lisa, I just want to double check as we have further conversations down the line. I want to remember who is here. Thanks. Oh, and I also see David Speck-Boardman from Senator Ballwig's office. Representative Considine just joined, and I see Christian is here from Senator Smith's office. So we have
Senator Smith just joined you too.
Okay, so Senator Smith just joined. Great, welcome. Okay, so we'll roll into a presentation by Charles here shortly, but I just wanted to give you a quick update on a few things that have been going on since we last met. We are pretty fortunate that oh yeah, Kevin Krentz is on. He can't unmute himself. So I did in fact recognize both his Chad's phone number, so I guess I talked to you guys a bunch. I wanted to give you an update on a few things that have gone on just since we last met, and these interim meetings were set up because there was such a robust discussion at the end of the last meeting. It kind of revolved around some things relating to logistics, things I wanted to make sure to mention. Item number one is we talked last time about how funding for the Wisconsin Initiative for Ag Exports came through Governor Ever's budget in cooperation with the legislators, some of whom are on our call here today. And we need to go back to the legislature to request funding to continue our operations year by year. July 1st is the start of our new fiscal year. We have submitted a request for $558,400 to continue this year's activities. There's a lot of activities that were included in our 5-year plan, the plan that I believe Lisa and Mark shared with you all, either before or after the last meeting. So we have made that request for the funding. It just happened yesterday, so we will work with our partners in the legislature to get that approved, and we are optimistic that that will happen. But again, that's something we need to work on. So I wanted to share that with you. I won't give you the full debrief. I think Mark and I and the team will do a little more formal PowerPoint on this when we get back together for the September meeting. But I did have opportunity to join USDA Deputy Secretary Jewel Bronow for a trade mission to London. And what I can tell you is that the timing of this meeting was good, as DACCAP is already, as part of our 5-year plan, planning a return to the UK sometime next late spring, early summer. So we use this trip to identify opportunities, and will give us some opportunities to recruit potentially interested businesses for that trip that we make. That's Wisconsin specific next year. Had a lot of opportunities. We visited a dairy farm, visited retail locations, ag research, or an ag research station, as well as meeting with several businesses or organizations there to kind of help set the framework for what we might want to do to get into that market as it evolves. I can share this with all of you. One of the themes that came up throughout the entire trip was sustainability. It's something that businesses and organizations and government officials referred to often as we were visiting with them. And the good news is, and some of you have shared this information with us, we have a great story to tell about sustainability. So I appreciate those who shared information with us in advance of that trip, because it gives us the tools that we need to tell the story of Wisconsin agriculture, and hopefully open up some of those opportunities even more. What I would say is that as you identify other ways that your members or your organizations are developing even more sustainable practices, please share them with us and our team. They get worked into our talking points, and Lisa, Mark, and our International Agribusiness Center can make sure that we're sharing that with others, because it's a growing, it seems to be a growing level of interest for people that we talk to. I can tell you too that that Krista Knigge is actually our Division of Ag Development Administrator, is actually in the Philippines on a USDA trade mission right now as well. And again, another market that we think there's great opportunity for Wisconsin products. And that'll be part of our September summary and discussion that we have with you all. New development as well, USDA and Kenya have entered into a preliminary discussion about trade opportunities between the two countries. And as luck would have it, right now, Mark and Lisa and our team are preparing to participate in a USDA-led mission to Kenya later on this October. So these things are lining up pretty well. We are fortunate that the plan that we worked with WEDC is a really good playbook for us to work from. Having said that, we also look for opportunities to pivot where we are able. Okay, I just one last thing I'll mention is that we've had, as part of that funding that I mentioned that was in the governor's budget, we had 2 grant opportunities, both from DACCAP with export market grants and the IMAG grants through WEDC, to get those grants out the door and into the hands of you, your members, and the industry. So thanks to those of you who were participating in that. Part of that funding will be used for a global dairy symposium that we're going to be helping to, well, we're funding at World Dairy Expo this fall. So we're really excited about that, because that's the place that the world comes for dairy. With that, I'll pause. I'll stop there. We're going to give a full, more built out report about some of the things that we've been able to do in markets in these USDA trade missions, and also what our plans are for the future, because we do want to make sure we're having a robust effort to recruit people to join us for the trade missions that that are coming up in the future. I also wanted to say that Katie Sinnott is here from WEDC, and I wanted to let her have a chance to speak as well, since WEDC is our partner in this effort. So Katie, do you want to do anything you'd like to share with the group?
Sure. Well, we're really pleased about the IMAG work that DACCAP has done. We fully utilized all of the $110,000 that was allocated for this previous fiscal year. And it looks like things are moving equally as well this year with already one application coming forward. So really pleased with the collaboration and looking forward to finding ways to support your trade venture needs and including debt cap and collaborating on those trade ventures where it makes sense for the two groups. So thank you for including me.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for being aboard. And then with that, unless, does anybody have any questions? And if not, I'll turn it back over to Lisa.
Great. Well, why don't we move to the first presentation. Charles will Walksmouth of Chippewa Valley Bean will be sharing how they are trying to solve our logistical or work through our logistical challenges. And Charles has a presentation and a video to share with all of us. So over to you, Charles.
Good morning. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Secretary Romanski. I do want to, before I get into the logistics things, to buttress what the Secretary said about sustainability. This year, we did our first base level carbon audit because our largest customer in Europe required it. Next year, by next year, we will have to do a full 3-phase carbon audit and set a date for carbon neutrality. This is non-negotiable for our largest customer. The other thing we're doing next month is what's called an ethical supply chain audit. That's a SMETA audit through a group called SEDEX. That is another non-negotiable thing. If these companies, the company I'm speaking of is a company in Italy called Ladoria. They sell to the big groups like Audi and Lidl. Aldi is, it's if you don't do these things, you don't get the business. So everybody in Wisconsin who's looking to export into Europe needs to be very aware of these third-party audits they're gonna have. So with that though, I'll talk about what I'm here to talk about today, which is logistics and some solutions and problems that Chippewa Valley Bean has had recently. And there's been quite some talk about it. So let me bring up my PowerPoint. Oops. Okay, so jokingly, I called this presentation a logistics company that sells beans, because that is what we are quickly turning into at Chippewa Valley Bean. This picture was a very exciting day for us in May. It was taken at the Port of Duluth, and behind me in that photo is the Nunavik. It's a ship we had privately contracted to haul 200 containers. But let's start at a little more basic level. So Chippewa Valley Bean Company was founded in 1972. We are the largest processor and exporter of kidney beans in the world. We currently have offices in Dunn County, Wisconsin, and in Italy. And the reason for Italy is the largest export market for kidney beans in the world, single country. We originate beans from over 100 family farms in the Midwest. That's Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the Dakotas. And we trade and broker a full commodity basket from around the world. So prior to the conflict, and actually still through the conflict, we source Navy beans in Ukraine. We source beans in Argentina. We've sourced quinoa around the world and things like that. So it's all in an effort to provide our customers everything they need from one house. And I would like to say, if there's any questions, please pop them up in the chat or feel free to jump in at any time. So this is a very telling graph. These are our our containers per year from the last 5 years. And as you can see, from 2017 to 2021, we were on a growth path. And then there's 2022. And 2022 is not a lack of sales. It is not a lack of customers. It is not competition from around the world. It is logistics. And so I want you to look at that line and remember the approximately 600 containers so far in 2022. So traditionally, when Chippewa Valley Bean started exporting in the 80s, the vast majority, basically everything that shipped east went out through Montreal. And that went out through the Canadian Pacific Rail Yard in Minneapolis. We would source load from our facility in Dunn County. These trucks would come from Minneapolis with containers. they would spend less than an hour on their docks and they'd head back to Minneapolis. Depending on traffic, we could turn a truck 3 times in a day. This has worked well for over 30 years. And then now today, starting with the pandemic, actually somewhat before the pandemic, we started seeing limited container availability. Add to that, Montreal goes on a yearly strike. Then the next thing that really happened was CP Rail throttled our number of containers we could ship weekly through the Minneapolis yard. And in fact, in 2022, we shipped around 10 containers from Minneapolis to Montreal. And when you look back at those numbers and say 2020, when we were shipping 1,100 containers, and 1,100 of those containers would go from Minneapolis to Montreal. 2022, it's about 10. And finally, there's been regular changes and delays to once reliable bookings. The transatlantic shipment, they're not honoring bookings. Bookings are rolling, and the schedules just aren't as regular as they have been for absolutely decades. So what is Chippewa Valley being tried to continue our business? Well, let's ship through to East Coast ports, New York, Newark, Jacksonville, wherever. So that takes CP Rail from Minneapolis to Chicago and then Chicago to East Coast ports. CP Rail doesn't connect with the rail going east. So those trucks or those rail that on those containers on rail then have to be put on trucks and taken cross town, which is terribly congested. So for example, during the Port of Montreal strike last year, we lost containers in Chicago for up to 2 months. They just got stuck there. Solution number 2, load boxcars here in Eau Claire for the Gulf ports and those containers, and then stuff containers at ports. What we found is we can't get serviceable boxcars. We don't have an exact number, but we're rejecting upwards of 50% of the boxcars they're offering us. Also, costs are extremely high, but with something we've done because otherwise we haven't been able to get service to our Middle East customers. So then we search for local and regional intermodal solutions. Most of the terminals or many of the terminals don't hand marine cargo containers, or they don't go to, whatever rail they are is not usable for us. Or the final thing is transit time is just unworkable. Traditionally, we've been able to ship from Dunn County to ports in Europe in 6 weeks. Our current model is 8 to 10 weeks, and that's iffy at best. So one other thing we've done is we've shipped from Cleveland to Antwerp, and that's worked, but the cost is high. And the issue is most of our containers that we need to ship need to go to Southern Europe. So it's using Antwerp has been only so practical. Luckily, we have shipped our first 4 containers from Antwerp to Salerno via rail to a intermodal terminal called NOLA. I don't know if anybody's familiar, but we're hoping to see better results from that. So those are the things we tried. Then we go into here to what I'm calling the solution. And many of you guys, I'm sure, have seen the articles. I talked about this at the DOT meeting not too long ago. So the solution was to privately lease 220 Nextbox containers. And I plan on showing a video about these Nextbox containers in just a moment. And then the idea was to privately contract a ship that was going to run from Duluth first to Antwerp and then down to Salerno. So here was the first problem. Our contracted ship broke down in Turkey, and we were waiting for it to get fixed and waiting for it to get fixed. And to the point where all of a sudden, if that ship were to come from Turkey, we would have missed all the windows we needed to hit. So now the next idea was to ship from Duluth to a small port called Valleyfield, which is just out of Montreal, and then truck the containers to Montreal. So we did that, and that was the big day. That's the pictures on the left from when we loaded in Duluth, and it was such a proud day for us because we were trying something new. Well, once this happened, due to the small ship and small freight line problems, we lost over a week, close to 2 weeks due to paperwork delays. Once the ship arrived in Valleyfield, the promised trucking was unavailable. And so as of today, from the end of May, when we shipped those 197 actually containers from Duluth, we still have 40 of those containers remaining at Valleyfield. So what other problems have come up with this? Well, our phytosanitary certificates have expired. Our inspection certificates have expired. So what do you do with a source loaded container that is sealed at our facility and then needs to be re-inspected? It's been just a snowball that's turned into an avalanche. So here's basically what the summary is. It was an amazing experience. We've learned a lot, and next time we can do better. We also learned that there is no silver bullet. The idea that shipping out of Port of Duluth with our own containers was going to solve all our problems turned out not to be true. We knew it wouldn't be a full solution, but we'd hoped it would release pressure on other shipping lanes that we needed to use. The other idea, it's going to take partnerships across industries. It's not just agriculture, in Wisconsin and Minnesota to make the Port of Duluth work. We need to be able to offer a large amount of containers, and that depends. The size of the ship that we use, the Nunavik holds 800 containers. So if we want regular service out of the Port of Duluth, we need 800 containers at a time. And that's not just Chippewa Valley beans. So how do we work with cranberries? How do we work with wood? How do we work with dairy? How do we work with anybody, whether it's truck parts or whatever, to get 800 containers on a regular basis to entice the shipping lines to run a regular service? And this doesn't even have to be service to Europe, but if we could get a feeder ship that runs regular from Duluth to Montreal and back, that would be an amazing thing. And so what we also learned is our fight for logistics is far from over. There are a lot of things we continue to try and will continue to do as we work on it. I've been in talks with people across industries, across public-private partnerships, talking to WEDC and DACCAP on how we can figure out who's going to ship or who's shipping what from where in ones or twos. Is it possible if we looked at a range of 5 hours out of the Port of Duluth, how can we cobble together this regular need? And I can tell you, I can talk for hours on what our problems have been, but I know that we are not an island, that everybody's experiencing things like this, whether it's congestion in Chicago or lack of access in Minneapolis. So how do we work together from the state of Wisconsin and our neighbors in Minnesota? Because the more containers that move, the more affordable it is. And we'll go from there. So with that, I'll actually open it up for questions on this. I know I was very short, but I wanted to keep it brief so we could have a discussion on this.
Yeah, this is Larry Krieger from Krieger Lumber Company. I'm curious about that Port of Duluth option. I was in communication with Peter Herthy, who used to be with the Port of Milwaukee, and now he's the international trade specialist for the different ports around the Great Lakes. And he also mentioned the Port of Duluth as a possible option. But when I told him how much we pay now out of the Chicago rail terminals to go to Asia and Europe, he suggested the Port of Duluth was significantly more expensive than shipping out of Chicago. Do you have any idea what the cost is per container to go to, say, somewhere in your port in Italy that you use, Duluth?
Well, no, because what happened is we shipped 200 containers privately. So this was all Chippewa Valley bean. Larry, what I'm hoping for the future is as we look at what you need to do and what we need to do, that we can come up with, like I said, regular service. And if there's regular service via the Port of Montreal, I believe we can bring prices down. So the only other marine container port we have working regularly is the Port of Cleveland. And there's one boat the Peyton Lee, I believe, and that ship runs strictly from Cleveland to Antwerp. And so what I view as our goal for the Port of Duluth is just to start with one ship. And maybe that ship just as a feeder vessel from Duluth to Montreal. And if we can do that, whether it's every 2 months or every quarter or every month, the regularity of that and being able to say to the shipping lines, we have 800 containers every 2 months, get us a boat. That is what's going to bring the cost down. It's we need to cobble together an alliance of some nature, and it's going to require planning on the parts of the shippers, whether it's lumber or soybeans or kidney beans, to get that done. This is not something that next week you can book a container from Duluth. This is going to be a concerted effort on exporters over the next month, over the next months, years even, to finally get that regular service. One other thing though, Larry, is I would look at, there is an intermodal terminal at Duluth. You might want to check your rates to Asia from there, because we've had decent service along those lanes going out West Coast ports.
I actually have checked the rates out of the Port of Duluth, and unfortunately, they're not competitive. And for us, the Port of Duluth is a significant distance from eastern Wisconsin. But I appreciate your efforts in trying to get to the Port of Duluth some traffic. I think, unfortunately, those small ships that serve the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Great Lakes, they usually have a significantly higher operating cost per container than the large container vessels that serve the east and west coast. But I wish you luck. It's a struggle to try to get product out of Wisconsin, and good rail service would really help that.
No doubt. Any other questions? Comments?
Charles, comment and then maybe a question in here too. But number one, thanks for presenting. Really helpful. I've had a chance to listen to your journey over the last few months, and I suspect it's like others who are dealing with logistics. There are challenges that keep popping up along the way that are beyond your control, but I commend the efforts to try and find solutions along the way. So here's the question that goes along with this. I'll ask you, Charles, and then also open it to the members. I see Brandon joined us from DeLong as well. But as you experience these challenges that go on, and I took note of your comment at the end, Charles, about this is going to take a concerted effort between business industry and cooperative ventures for each state to try and find other solutions. Is there, do you all have a suggested triage of where our best opportunities might be to try and connect some dots on that? I don't expect anybody to have the answer right now, but I'll just pose that question to the members of the Wisconsin Egg Export Council. Could we think about that? And maybe that's part of our discussion in September, is where are the opportunities for us to kind of start build some additional bridges? So Charles, I'll turn that over to you. Brandon, anybody else that wants to comment on that as well? And then maybe it breeds a discussion down in September when we get back together.
Yeah, I'll just jump on that quickly. At Farm Tech Days, I had a great opportunity to speak to some regional folks from WEDC with the idea of performing a survey of their districts and who's shipping what and what kind of time frame on that, so we can start putting together this idea. And I view this as something that's for our council to talk about and work on. And, as Larry said, Duluth's pretty far away from them, so it may not be an option for him. But if let's say we do 800 containers every 2 months out of Duluth, that's 800 containers that aren't clogging up Chicago, or that's 800 containers that aren't already on a stressed pipeline that we can move. And I view the idea that of developing these Great Lake ports in Wisconsin, whether that, if Milwaukee were to do a container terminal or expanding the container terminal in Duluth and Superior, it's just another option. And again, any container that's going out of there is not going out on somebody in southern Wisconsin's line. And so it behooves us all just to create relief valves. And I think the first aspect is to figure out what's going where and with who, so we can start the discussions and move things going that way. And I view that as we definitely will need help from the state and state agencies to gather and process that information.
Charles, this is Matt Umhafer, and I'll touch on this briefly, but with regard to your last comment, as far as what containers are going where, we conducted a survey as part of our intermodal study, which I believe you're familiar with, but there are depictions from the state of Wisconsin at the zip code level of traffic to the different coasts. So, at this point, that data is obviously, roughly 4 years old, and COVID certainly has disrupted things, but at the state government level, that might be the most recent available snapshot that you could take a look at, or the private sector in general can take a look at.
Thank you, Matt. I think that let's connect and we can get that and start looking at that before our meeting in September to try and fold that into our plan.
Gentlemen, this is Dave Lusinger. I'll also append that the research done for the Northeast Intermodal study done by CPCS looked at a lot of those trade lanes, at least on the domestic side. They weren't, surprisingly enough, they weren't as focused on the import-export side of things, but it did find some unfortunate major imbalances, especially from the Northeast area. A lot of product that they're sending out, but not a lot coming back in. So that's where you get the imbalance in the numbers of containers, and then the lanes don't even match, where you have the highest demand versus the highest the highest outflow versus the highest inbound. And I'll share that with the group here momentarily here on chat.
But yes, Charles, certainly we'd be happy to have a discussion on the findings.
That'd be great. Thank you.
This is Larry Krieger again. Dave brings up a really important point. In order to make container traffic financially feasible, you really have to recognize where the import markets are, with who's bringing or who has the potential need to bring containers into our state, because they typically pay 3 times or more per container than us exporters do. So it's really important to recognize who is bringing product into our state. And then we have the empty containers once their product is here, and then we can ship it out with our export products, and everybody makes money and everybody has increased efficiency and everybody's a little more happy. I've always wondered how we could possibly use our existing Watco lines and connect with the rail terminals on Watco to a class 1 that that's not already servicing our container business here in Wisconsin. And I'm wondering if we could somehow incorporate those Watco lines, say out of Oshkosh, and build container traffic and connect to one of the other class 1 railroads like CP or BNSF, and then introduce a little more competition in the container business. Because what he said about the stress on our existing system in Chicago is huge. We wait months for containers to come in and out of the Chicago rail system because it's swamped. But if we could develop container rail loading system here in Wisconsin, we could probably avoid that traffic jam that is Chicago right now, and we could save some money. And then think about the containers. If we load them here in Wisconsin, we could load them a little more heavy. We wouldn't have to go down those 80,000 pound weight limit highway systems that we have, a federal highway system. So we could save money on transportation and we could ship a little more product. Really, if we could somehow introduce competition on our class 1 container traffic, perhaps using Watco as an instrument to collect those containers, that would be a huge benefit to our state.
Thanks, Larry. I saw Brandon came off mute. And Brandon, did you want to share some of your experiences as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few things. Chicago is very difficult, and I'm sorry I missed the very beginning of your presentation, Charles. One of the things we have been doing over the last maybe 6 months is we've actually been doing some transloading for the Way market, a product coming out of the Minneapolis area to Chicago. We're stuffing the containers and returning it to the rail. That's been going fairly well. Obviously, there's a lot of details that worked into that, but we can talk about that offline if you'd like. But I just think that maybe there's some solutions. I agree. Chicago is super, super difficult. But one of the things that helps in Chicago is if you have a lot of density. So you're not trying to match this container with this truck to this window. If the window shifts, the container or the truck can go take a different container somewhere else. We're seeing that a lot. Traditionally the ag exports such as corn, soybeans, DDGs, they were source loaded, maybe somewhere between 20 miles and 100 miles away from Joliet, Illinois. In the people that have continued to do that are really struggling in this market. But being localized right there with a couple of facilities, the way DeLong's is fortunate enough to be, we've been able to manage Chicago quite a bit better, I think, than some of our competitors. And maybe we can work together on some of these commodities and, whether it's perform a transload and get it to the right rail ramp for you guys, or I definitely think we're open. I know we're open to discussion on things like that. So just please reach out if you guys are interested.
Thank you, Brandon. That'd be something to look at.
Any other comments or questions? Great. I'm sure we'll be talking more about this in the future and having some offline conversations between our members. Next, I'd like to bring our colleagues at the Wisconsin Department of Transportation on board. Matt Umhafer will be giving a presentation, but just want you to know that Dave Lusinger is on this meeting, and I believe Dave Hubbard as well from their team. So I'll turn it over to Matt Umhafer to give an overview on the Freight Advisory Committee and their work on the state freight plan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name's Matt Umhafer. I am the recently appointed Economic Development Chief for DOT. Been with the department for about 7 years, including 3 years working as the department's freight program officer, where I led the Intermodal Subcommittee effort, and see several of our subcommittee members on the call this morning. So good to see everyone again. As Lisa mentioned, I'm going to just have a brief presentation here on our Freight Advisory Committee and what's going on with the department's state freight plan update. I should ask, are these slides coming through okay?
Yes,
they're coming through.
Okay, great, thanks. So starting with the FAC, our Freight Advisory Committee came into being in 2015, and Secretary Gottlieb's vision at the time was for a group to gather to address these 4 key parts. We wanted to be able to review critical freight issues with stakeholders, give those stakeholders an opportunity to provide input or advice to WSDOT on priorities and policies that affect freight mobility, to serve as a set of advocates for the importance of Wisconsin's freight transportation system, and then to help expand Wisconsin's role in national and world freight movements. And I certainly will say Larry Krieger has been a very good advocate, in particularly on that last bullet, since he's been a member of the FAC. So our membership is currently 39 organizations. It's fluctuated from 36 to 45. We have a couple vacancies among the organizations right now. But as you can see the list of types of organizations, we really do bring together a broad cross-section of stakeholders, from shippers and carriers to different government entities to federal and state regulatory agencies, and then from a few of the state's academic institutions. So it's really been an excellent group of people to work with. I am proud to say that our retention rates, the appointments for these members are 2 years. Our retention rates and interest from these members to continue serving on the FAC has been over 90% at each decision point. So I think that speaks well to what we're accomplishing and what the committee members think of what they're contributing to state government policy development. So as far as agriculture goes, there are 3 organizations that represent the ag community: Wisconsin Agribusiness Association with Tom Bresner, the Farm Bureau with Karen Geffert, and then DACAP is represented by Secretary Romansky. So the meetings themselves are held twice yearly. We've been really good about maintaining that schedule, with the exception of the first year of COVID in 2020, when everything was thrown into chaos. We have been able to meet that schedule. These are usually a full business day event, and they are anchored around 2 to 3 either modal issues or macroeconomic topics. You can see some of the examples in those bullet points below, everything from rail access and air freight to the cold supply chain and COVID's impacts on freight mobility. So the members have a voice. At the end of every meeting, we ask for topics they are interested in. Obviously, you know, they are boots on the ground, if you were, as far as what are the large topics that the state needs to be aware of and helping to develop policies to address. So each one of those bullets at some point came from one of the members. And then that last line there, FAC meetings are open meetings under state law. So anyone, if any of the associations that are on the call this morning have constituent members that, you know, see the agenda and think they'd like to sit in, they're certainly welcome. I will mention the cold supply chain anchored meeting in particular. We had quite a few private sector companies that were not FAC members per se, but that ran their own refrigerated warehouse or refrigerated trucking firm that, you know, wanted to attend and offer their thoughts to the set of questions we were discussing at that meeting. So as I said, this group has been meeting since 2015, and in my opinion, these are the 2 biggest achievements, you know, that go along with the ongoing policy advice. First, throughout 2016 and 2017, the group offered a lot of key contributions to the development of our first state freight plan. That freight plan was approved by USDOT and adopted by the department in early 2018, and the completion of that plan opened up over $70 million in National Highway Freight Program funds. Those funds largely funded interstate projects, 39 and 43 in particular. But without completion of that plan, those dollars would have remained locked away. The second one, we've talked a little bit about this, the Intermodal Subcommittee. So this was, there was a new policy, a new department policy to work with stakeholders to develop an intermodal strategy for Wisconsin that came out of stakeholder engagement while we were developing that first state freight plan. So in late 2017, we announced the creation of this committee. It eventually reached 22 organizations, 6 of which were state government entities, the other 16 of which were either private sector firms or nonprofits. That subcommittee was co-chaired by WSDOT and WMC. I talked briefly about the survey. That activity was conducted by WMC on behalf of the larger subcommittee in summer and early fall of 2018. We gathered that data in conjunction with a pretty hefty narrative that had been developed throughout calendar year 2018, and the report itself was published in March 2019. I would encourage anybody who's interested in learning more about intermodal to, at a minimum, read the executive summary. We have, I believe it's about a 16 or 18 page executive summary that hits the highlights of what the group discussed and discovered during the course of the subcommittee's existence. So about 8 months later or so, working with MMAC in Milwaukee and New North in Northeast Wisconsin, the department co-sponsored a pair of intermodal summits. These were very well attended. I believe each one of them had in the neighborhood of 125 to 150 attendees. We had representatives from the steamship community, different railroads. Schneider spoke at the Appleton event. We had 3PL firms, freight forwards, a very good cross section of business representatives were in attendance. And then the last bullet, and certainly would not want to say that the subcommittee was Canadian National's reasoning for opening the terminal, but I personally do not find a coincidence that about 16 months after the intermodal summits, we're proud to say Canadian National did open the first new intermodal terminal in Wisconsin in nearly a decade. So we view that as a significant opportunity for importers and exporters to work with Canadian National as another location, albeit on the west side of the state. And I certainly understand Larry's concerns about the lack of intermodal terminals in eastern Wisconsin, but the fact is it is a new intermodal yard within Wisconsin's borders. So moving on to the state freight plan. You may be familiar with Connect 2050, possibly have heard that phrase sometime in the last year to two. Connect 2050 is the department's statewide long-range multimodal transportation plan. It was approved earlier this year, and as that first bullet states, it creates a direction WSDOT will follow to support the development of an integrated, efficient, and safe multimodal transportation system. So the state freight plan, like the other lighter turquoise circles on the right side of the slide, will help implement Connect 2050's goals. So Connect 2050 provides what should be accomplished, and state freight plan will identify the how. So what is the state freight plan? it's a statewide look. Many RPCs and MPOs have developed their own regional freight plans, I guess you could call them, but this is a statewide look. Per USDOT and the bill, that the new infrastructure law signed last fall, we're looking out 8 years. It is multimodal, so there are policy statements, or there will be policy statements regarding roads, rail, air, maritime. Pipelines is not on the slide, but pipelines will be included. So it's really looking across the entire transportation system. And then we've got quite a few data sets to help not only capture the current state of the freight environment, but that allow for some forecasting as far as what future needs might be. So a nice graphic that we developed. The plan will include new and updated info since the last freight plan. I mentioned it was, the previous one was approved and adopted in early 2018. We're assessing freight needs and issues through the data I just talked about, as well as stakeholder engagement. And there will be an opportunity for public feedback coming up. It's going to guide statewide investment. So one of the requirements, not only to list and address policies that the department takes into account as we invest in our system, but there actually will be a list of specific projects that those National Highway Freight Program funds that I referenced earlier will that the department would expect to spend those federal funds on from 23 to 30. We're hoping it engages and reflects the interests of a wide array of freight stakeholders. And then lastly, it will align the policies with what has been laid out in Connect 2050. So kind of just to recapture some of what I've said, we're hoping the findings help integrate freight improvements to construction projects and prioritize some of those projects for funding, and then to position Wisconsin to remain competitive in the global marketplace. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions anyone might have.
Thanks very much, Matt. Going back to the report you mentioned that was conducted with via zip code. You had information via zip code of what was being transported or shipped. Where can we find that report? Is it on your website, or is it something that you could email to me and I could share with the group?
Sure, it's that full data set is in the full report. That is, I think we put some of the graphics into the executive summary, but not all of them.
Okay.
Dave, could you grab the link to the full report and stick it in the chat, please?
Right.
And yeah,
I just did the whole intermodal page there, which
Okay.
includes both the executive summary, the entire notes from all the different subcommittee meetings, and then of course the agendas from the 2 summits.
So Lisa, just to be more precise in what people will see, and you want to start looking around PDF page 113 or 112 or so is where we start talking about the survey. But there are maps reflecting imports both from overseas and other parts of North America to Wisconsin zip codes. And that was both a current And then we asked businesses to project out 5 years, which, would now be 2023. There were current and projected exports, both from Wisconsin zip codes to overseas and domestic markets or North American markets. And then beginning on page I'll say PDF page, right? Because it's a little bit different than the page labeling. PDF page 133, you can see this is not by zip code. These are broken up into 4 regions of Wisconsin, but where imports and exports both to overseas and to North American locations are headed. So I can just share real quick what I'm talking about there. So these were in 20-foot equivalent units. Pull this up a little bit. Northeast Wisconsin, which we at the time defined as this set of counties. The businesses there said they were importing about 491 containers and exporting 1,210 to the Canadian West Coast. And the reason we broke the destinations or sources in the case of imports into these categories was because it's a informal way of reflecting which railroads the companies were using. So US West would be BNSF and Union Pacific versus US East would be CSX and Norfolk Southern.
Great, thank you. Any questions, comments for Matt or his group?
One comment, Matt, Dave, and Dave, thanks for joining us today. This was a good follow-up. I know some of the Wisconsin Ag Export Council members were able to join the last Freight Advisory Committee discussion. So thanks for those who did that to connect some dots. Here's a question I have for you. So the state freight plan is something that's going to help guide how we accomplish things. Is this an opportunity for people on this group, the members of this group and their organizations, to get comments into DOT? How best can they do that? Where best can they do it? And what's a good framework? The state freight plan is a big document, but what's the best way we can get them information so that they can make comments?
Yeah, that's a great question, sir. So I don't have the exact timeline. We are currently consolidating all the policy statements right now. That, as you can imagine, is not a 2-day event. But we are hopeful. I guess I'll just give myself some wiggle room. In the relatively near future, the document will be available for public comment. Certainly all the FAC members will be aware it's released. The department intends to publicize it via social media. We certainly would support a social distribution of the awareness of it once it's out. So to the extent that this forum wants to, because it's going to be largely web-based, so it's pretty simple to do. Certainly, this forum here could share awareness of it to all the members, and then I think the feedback mechanism is going to also be web-based largely. So hopefully that's conducive. If there are other mechanisms that would be more conducive to a specific company, we certainly would be interested in hearing what those are. So does that answer your question, Randy?
It does. I just wanted to kind of make that opportunity available to all of the members and their organizations and others from the world of agriculture. I appreciate the seats that have been identified on the Freight Advisory Committee for agriculture. I think it's a logical connection. I mean, we've had discussion today about the challenges of moving product, and I wanted to make sure that this group had opportunity to chime in accordingly. So relatively near future, the document will be available for public comment. So I'm going back to something Charles, it came up because of Charles's presentation, is that in September, we're going to maybe think about triaging some of those things that might make the most sense or might be good thoughts to share about what are some possible solutions. Is that time frame going to be within when you think you'll be collecting public input? So after that discussion in September, could the members of this group, is there going to be time for them to share those thoughts at that point?
I would estimate that would work based upon what I know right now.
Great, thank you.
Matt, if I may, I just will reiterate that we'll be working with Lisa when we do have the rollouts of our public involvement phases and the tools that we'll be using for public involvement. I'll make sure Lisa is looped in on that so she can share that with the WAXC.
Sure.
Great, thanks. Wonderful.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak this morning.
Thanks, Matt, for joining us, and also Dave Lusinger and David Hubbard. Any other comments or questions from the group?
Charles here. I'm looking at just quickly the overview of intermodal freight with the current import and export lanes you have. What year was that from?
That study was, that survey was conducted mid 2018.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else that someone would like to cover?
I can jump in at this point. We've allowed some. First of all, thanks to everybody for being part of this. I know this is an add-on to our originally scheduled meetings, and so you're sharing your time with us. There was a nice transition from what Charles had to present to what DOT was talking about, and because of the last Freight Advisory Committee meeting, I wanted to make sure that this group knew about the opportunity to contribute to that state freight plan down the line here. So that's a good connection to make, and it's also kind of stimulated a possible discussion point for our September meeting to talk about some of those priorities. Any other comments or thoughts that people have based off of today's discussion or ideas that have come up since our last meeting that you'd like to share today?
This is Larry Krieger again. I want to thank everyone for expressing their opinions on the situation for shipping out of Wisconsin now. I just like to reiterate those struggles we have where the Chippewa Beans has to ship out of the Port of Montreal and use a small ship and get it transloaded up there. And there's got to be a lot of extra costs involved in all of that. But I think that's just a reflection on the struggles we have as a state to export our agricultural products. I can't emphasize enough how difficult it is right now to try and ship all those containers out of Chicago. There is literally months and months of wait to try to get our product out, and thousands of dollars of additional costs per container. Whatever we do, we should really, really work hard to try to make our agricultural products a little more efficient in the way that we ship them, because it's devastating to our industries.
Thanks for sharing, Larry. Yeah, I think this, the Freight Advisory Committee is kind of is set up to help have those discussions. And I think this is our opportunity to share ideas as part of the state freight plan. But you know, your thoughts about the thoughts that have come up about containers and intermodal. I know this, his team is on the line with us, but he's not. I've had a couple of different conversations with Secretary Thompson at DOT, and he's enthusiastic supporter of building out some intermodal capacity in the state that will not replace Chicago, but be a supplement so that we can move some of our commodities better. And I look forward to the ongoing discussions that we'll have to provide suggestions. I really, any information that you all have about that, we've got the DOT connections on here now, and we can certainly make sure that we're sharing that information with DOT. Great. And the next, we do have another interim meeting set for August, and Lisa, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at that point we should have 6 months data or preliminary 6 months data available for the first half of the year that we'll be able to share with folks. Is that correct?
That's correct. The next meeting is Wednesday, August 7th. It's August 17th. I'll double check what day of the week that is. But we will be covering our 6-month export statistics for 2022. That's when the first report will be, the 6-month report will be out. And we'll be able to report on that. And then Katie will also be joining us and presenting. We're talking, WEDC and DACCAP will talk about how we pull those export statistics, what mechanism we use. All the export stats come from US Census Bureau. So we'll be both presenting to you on our export statistics 6-month. And we report on a quarterly basis and of course a full year basis. So we're looking forward to that. Just want to say thanks to Matt. He just had to hop off. Thanks so much for his presentation, and glad that our partners from DOT could be with us today. I will be sending out a save the date or a calendar invite to you for the August 17th meeting, and it'll be a morning meeting. We look forward to seeing you there. In the meantime, please don't hesitate to contact me with your questions. If you need the links to the 2 reports that Matt and Dave referenced, I can email those out to you as a follow-up from today's informational meeting to the whole council. But we're glad you could join us today, and please feel free to let me know, let Randy know of any other topics you'd like to cover in the future that we could
Lisa,
gather. Yeah.
Since we've got pretty good representation from the council members today, maybe we can just send those links out from DOT to the entire council, so that way if they weren't able to attend, they can at least have access to the links.
I'll do that after the meeting concludes.
That's great. Yep. And then I would echo what Lisa said. If there are other issues that you have that come up, please do let us know. As we are getting ready to wrap up here, just wanted to give Katie from WEDC an opportunity to share anything further that she'd like to before we wrap up here.
Great. Thank you, Randy. I appreciate the time. We're looking forward to the 6-month trade numbers. Wisconsin has been doing very well. And I really appreciate the discussion on the intermodal service and the survey of DOT. I participated in that effort, and we are really delighted to see that new intermodal terminal, although it didn't potentially solve all our problems. It's quite a significant movement to have something new like that. So kudos to everyone who is involved in that. So thank you.
Thanks, Katie. So I think we'll be wrapping up. Any parting words, Randy?
No, thanks again for everybody who joined and for the conversation. It's helpful to get some specific details about some of the challenges you all are facing as it relates to getting access to freight cars and logistics, and look forward to the future brainstorming session we might have where we can spotlight which of those challenges are the highest in your opinion, and then how can we give some feedback to DOT about what the industry is thinking. So I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for being here.
Thank you, Randy. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and we'll be back here August 17th, Wednesday, to talk about export stats. Thanks so much.